talking about, safeguarding your research, avoiding predatory journals. So let me just share with you what we're going to be covering today. So in this session, we're going to talk about what are predatory journals, how to recognize them, what to do about them, so the importance of this topic is because it has consequences for research careers and in science and for science in general. So this is, how to deal with this is a very important, but also not a very simple topic. So I hope you will, find this useful. And please, if you have any questions, share that with us in the Q&A, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. Right, so how I'm going to cover this, just a brief introduction about some of the history. Most of you know that, I think, where did predatory journals come from? And then we'll define predatory journals. We'll also look at other malpractices because it will also put the predatory journals in context to understand what is predatory journals and what are some of the other unethical practices that we see these days in publishing. And then we'll talk about what Scopus does in terms of what is the Scopus mandate and how do we try to combat predatory journals. And then we'll talk about some general advice and recommendations for you to follow. I'm not going to discuss that specifically, but also through these slides, we'll share, the references and some related content. But first, the introduction, so where does this come from? What went wrong in publishing? So the term predatory was coined by Jeffrey Beall, a librarian at the University of Colorado in Denver, and it dates back to 2010. And this was also the time that open access started. And Beall noticed that there were some publishers, he called them so-called publishers, that were taking advantage of the open access system, right? So open access is the system whereby the publisher charges an article processing fee, and then it makes your article that you publish available for anybody to read. So it's a good system, but some publishers were taking advantage of this. So his definition of predatory was journals that prey on and often unsuspecting scholars to submit their manuscripts for the sole purpose of making money from these scholars. So he created this website. He published all the journals and the publishers that he was concerned about on this list. And this was the beginning of, so he coined the term and he started the whole process of monitoring these journals that were predatory. But it is important to note that although Beall was first to call out these rogue journals, not everybody agreed with his definition and the journals that he included in his list, for various reasons. So since this is since this was actually, seen as something that is really influencing, having a very negative influence on the whole research landscape, it's just important to note why. So the consequences of, what does this do is for the individual, firstly. So it affects the academic career and the possibilities for promotion, advancement, funding, raising, and for rating or for some or other ranking of researchers. And this is real. I personally have been asked a few times really to look into the CVs of researchers that have applied for funding, that are applying for a promotion, and the evaluators are very serious about catching out those researchers that are publishing in these journals, even if they are doing so without really knowing that the journals are predatory. But there is an expectation for researchers to make sure that they publish in high quality journals. It also has consequences for the institution, right? So If this happens on a regularly basis with a specific institution, the university will, the image of the university will increasingly become tainted. So the consequences are heavy. But since 2010, when Beale started with this, there's been an effort to try to define predatory publishing, because it's since 2010 there were different definitions of what is publishing. So a very concerted effort was made to really define it universally so that everybody understands what does predatory mean. And this led up to around 2019. Some researchers in science and technology came together and they put together a definition that is now known as the Ottawa Declaration. And they published this in November of 2019 in the journal Nature. So on the left-hand side, you can see where the article and how the article was presented. And what they basically said was that predatory journals and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false and misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, and a lack of transparency, and or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. Right. So if you deconstruct this definition, it says prioritize self-interest, which means the objective is to make money and to profit and not to advance science. At the expense of scholarship, it means that they publish work which has not been verified by experts. So it hasn't gone through any peer review. To attract submissions, they send out spam emails that provide misleading and false information on their website. So that definition really encapsulates a lot of different practices. But there are also other definitions which are a lot more direct. So in the lower definition, it says it's predatory journals are characterized by fake or fraudulent publication or publishing practices. The primary goal is extorting publication fees, so the article processing fees, from authors without confirming academic rigor and reliability. For example, ethical approval, plagiarism checks, so they do none of that. And so in essence, they pretend to be a legitimate journal and ask for payment for services, but they don't perform the activities that are associated with legitimate publishing. So if you look at what are the key editorial activities that you expect usually from a publisher or from a journal, which these publishers do not do, right? So they don't do peer review. So there's no peer review which compromises the validation of research findings. So the whole scientific system is basically based on peer review. So taking away that step really compromises the whole scientific system. They also lack to do any copy editing, typesetting, proofreading. There's absence usually of graphic design. The lack of plagiarism detection. So they don't check for plagiarism. They don't check those ethical activities within research that is very important. So they don't check that it is really original. The metadata and the search engine optimization is also lacking. So the articles are often not optimized for discoverability, and it also then limits the reach of your article in the academic and also in general. So the articles are not really discoverable. So when you're paying article processing charges, these are the things that you're actually paying for. They also they provide limited or low exposure on academic platforms, which affects your visibility and the impact of your publication of your work. So when your work is just put on a website and there's no way that it's promoted or it's not retrievable, that is really affecting also the chance of being cited or really making a contribution to the scientific world. There's inadequate ethical oversight, so the research findings are not checked for ethical, that it is ethical. And also, issues like data fabrication is not checked, for example. So the industry standard for article processing charges, across very generally across most publishers is around 1,500 $500, which is a large amount, and you would expect then all these activities must take place for that fee. So many of these activities are not easy to detect, actually. So we have to rely on other clues that may be an indication that a journal is predatory. It's very difficult because most of them say that they do peer review, but how do you check that? How do you know whether they're doing copy editing, et cetera, et cetera? These are all difficult things to really check. So generally, we rely on other signs or signals on the journal to give us an idea whether the journal might be predatory, but still keeping in mind that the main issue with predatory journals is that they are charging a fee and not delivering any of the services that go along with that fee that you would expect. So some of these characteristics are, for instance, that give an indication, but they don't really, they are, signals, they're matters of concern, but they don't necessarily can be used as evidence that the journal is predatory. It's just a clue. Okay, so false and misleading information. So there would be things like misrepresentation of the editorial board. So this is the whole editorial board might be fake, or it might be real persons, but you won't be able to validate because they don't have enough information about the editors on the editorial board. They would have fake impact factors, incorrect addresses, false claims that the journal is indexed in Scopus or Web of Science. And they would also link or give an indication that they are, members of associations, right? So, but if you check that, which is a lot of work to do, you would find that they are, that this is false information. Some of the other clues that you could pick up on that it might be a predatory journal is that just like it's an unprofessionally looking web page, there's spelling and grammar mistakes or some irrelevant text, etc. So this is a red flag, but this doesn't necessarily mean it's predatory. It could be just, a sloppy journal. Lack of transparency, so very little information about how editorial decisions are made, what the fees are. They would say there's peer review, but not, how the peer review process is followed, for example. It wouldn't be possible to verify who the editorial board members are. And then often it's also associated with aggressive solicitations or spamming. And these, spams often have a specific, characteristic. Also, I'll show you how they typically look. Right? So if you think of these signals or clues, how it looks like is something like this. You would get a spam, and it would say like something like greetings from a specific journal, but the name of the journal would be very vague. Also, it might be, targeting a specific region. It could be low middle class countries often because there's a big, expectation for researchers in these areas to publish in international journals. So they target those middle and lower income countries often. You would find that there's flattering or personal greetings, but there's no indication, there's no link between the subject matter of the journal and the subject matter that you are working in, for example. There would also be mention of some indexes or abstracting services. If you look at these, all of these, because this is a real example, these are not existent. These are fake names of abstracting and indexing services. And also often they would be vague in terms of where this email is coming from, right? So these are all red flags. getting an invitation from a publisher or a journal editor to publish in their journal is highly unlikely to get something like that, unless you are a very well-known researcher. So all spam, all of these letters should be taken with extreme caution. And then another way that you would, some of the clues would be, for instance, when they mention quick publication. So in this example, they specifically mentioned within 48 hours, which, as you all know, is impossible. So it is impossible for a process which includes peer review, because the peer reviewers have to be identified. You have to reach out to them. You have to give them time to do their peer review, et cetera, et cetera. So to publish within 48 hours is impossible, right? It would also, this one specifically mentions indexing and abstracting services which are not abstracting and indexing services. For instance, Google Scholar is not an index. It's a search engine for scholarly publications, but it's not an index per se. So the academic indexes are basically Scopus and Web of Science are the main scholarly indexes. The others are more search engines or databases. And then you have, for instance, very vague email address, like mostly academics that are at the level of editorialship would be connected to a university where they have a university email address. So if you see something from Gmail, that could also indicate, or it should be a little bit of a red flag. Right. So this is another example. So here we see, for example, the branding is a bit strange because the branding is basically clip art that has been put together. So it looks unprofessional. You can also see that there are some garbage characters. So that means that there was copy pasting. The addresses are very vague. So there's not real address information. No real names are used. Even the name of the journal is just an acronym. And this is another one which is also using, this is a stock photo, which is used as the branding of a journal, which is very unusual. And it's difficult to know whether this is a stock photo or a real photo. But this is just an example where just a random image on the web was used as the branding of the journal. And they're also providing fake impact factor, for example, and the ICV is also it's an index that is, really, frowned upon, and the numbers are also, fake numbers. And the last example that I have here is where there's a lot of misleading terminology. So you can see, if you're aware of, familiar with Scopus, you know that we have a site score. And if you're familiar with Web of Science, you know that they have journal impact factor. And here's a mixture of these terminologies used here. And if you look at the orange, the yellow highlighted area, the types of articles that are called articles, but that are, accommodated within this journal is right from a research paper up to a dissertation chapter to a research proposal or a complete thesis, right? So this is very unusual. Journals are usually very specific about what type of manuscripts they publish. Research articles, original research, review papers or conference papers, but not the whole, from article to a thesis. That is highly, highly improbable. Right. So all of these, as I mentioned, these are flags, there are signals that this journal, something's not right with this journal, but that still doesn't mean that it's a predatory journal. These are just some signals for us to follow and look deeper into the journal, because what we actually want to know is whether they are producing or providing any of this publishing services that you would expect from a legitimate publisher. So before we go on to what to do about this, I also want to just mention some of the other malpractices that we also see, so that you can differentiate between predatory, and other types of malpractices. And one of them is a hijacked journal. So this is similar to predatory journals in the sense that it is also the aim is to make money, right, in a fraudulent manner. So this is usually scammers that create a counterfeit version of a legitimate academic journal. So they create a fake website that looks very similar to the real journal's website. The logos, the formats, the layouts, etc., look exactly like the real journal, and then they try to get researchers to submit their articles to the fake journal, which has a similar name or even exactly the same name. So they use some various deceptive methods to do this. One of them is what they call URL spoofing. So they create a web address that is very similar to the real journal. So they would just slightly change like .org to .com or something like that. Or they would even, take advantage of when a journal's website or the domain has expired, right? So then they would take that over or even buy that, and then they would attract or solicit articles from researchers, again, paying an article processing fee, but they're not the real journal, and they're not doing any of the publishing, activities. There's also domain hijacking that can take place, or website cloning. So they have different ways of doing this. So a hijacked journal, this is very, why I'm saying this is similar to a predatory journal is because the objective is also, to make a profit fraudulently. And also it entails the entire journal. And we'll look at some other ethical issues also that are unethical, but they don't involve the entire journal. It's like articles in the journal, but not the entire journal. So preventative measures here with hijacked journals is to verify the journal website through official sources and databases. So you can check the official website on the web, and you can also check in an index like Scopus and see whether it is the real website, and also just check the contact information on those websites. So this does not happen as often as predatory journals, but it is also quite prevalent that this happens. And then we have some other deviant forms of publications. So these, while the predatory and the hijacked journals have the aim of profit, so it's extortion, racketeering, scamming, because they're taking money from researchers, not doing anything for it. But these other deviant forms of publishing don't have the aim of profiting financially. The profit or the way that they benefit is in terms of prestige of publishing. So it's gaining citations, for example, right? So this is, for instance, unethical publishing, where there's excessive publication by the editorial board in their own journal, so they're not doing proper peer review, high article intensity by the same author in the same issues, for example. So this is just to build a resume of high publications, but doing it in an unethical way. There's citation manipulation, references to publish or to papers without relevant reason. And the aim is then to boost the impact factor or to boost the site score, right? Then there are paper brokers, and this could be services or agents where you can buy authorship. So for a fee, they'll put your name on a paper so that you can add it to your resume. So obviously problematic. Then there are various plagiarism discretions that take place. So an article published, for instance, in terms of translations, you could have a article published in a local language and then republished in an international journal in another language. So that's plagiarism. And one of the recent things that we've seen also is tortured phrases, which is a signal of translation or paraphrasing to avoid plagiarism detection, right? So these tortured phrases are things like counterfeit consciousness. You can see this is AI that has translated terminology. So counterfeit consciousness is supposed to be artificial intelligence, right? So that's just paraphrasing to hide the plagiarism that was committed. Recently, we've also seen a lot of unethical activities around special issues where there are guest editors. Sometimes there's conflict of interest of the guest editor. There's not proper peer review. There's a citation manipulation that takes place also. So citing publications that do, or, citing, including references that are not relevant, for example. And there are things like citation cartels. So groups of researchers, it could be researchers or authors or institutions, and they collude to artificially inflate citation counts for their own work, or also, for the collaborators. And this is also to manipulate the impact factor, and also, citing unrelated work, self-citation, etc. Right? So these are clearly unethical practices. It's not predatory. They're not making money from, or not directly making money from this. The aim is rather to inflate citation counts, inflate publication counts, with a later, possibility of getting financial remuneration from that. This can happen within a journal, without the journal editors knowing about this, and it doesn't usually affect the entire journal. It could be individual articles within the journal. And that's a big differentiation with predatory journals, where predatory journals, the whole entity of the journal is a problem, is basically fraudulent. Right. So moving on to, so what do we at Scopus do in terms to also, try to protect us from, because these scammers are really very sophisticated and very clever. So what do we do at Scopus to address the issue? So the first thing that we do at Scopus is we do curation, right? So all the journals, the 28,000 journals that we index in Scopus, go through a curation process. We have a board, an independent board, the Content Selection and Advisory Board, and they select each of these journals for us to make sure that they comply with, specific standards. As you can see on this little, I'm not sure you can read it, but I'll go through it again. So looking at very specific criteria, which we have identified are important for journals to be at a certain standard. So that's the curation process. We also do re-evaluation of those journals, because it has happened that a journal starts off as a harmless, good quality journal, and then it turns predatory later on. So re-evaluation is an important process for us. So we have algorithms running in the background to measure any kind of outlier activities on journals, and then it goes through the process of re-evaluation again. And then finally, if we discover any journals that are predatory, but also other journals that are not meeting our standards any longer, or the original standards that we had, the journal would be discontinued, and those journals are then published. Right? So if you go to scopus.com and you go to content, information about the content, you will find that you can download the list of journals that have been discontinued. So these are all in a nutshell, these are the processes. Each of these processes are actually quite complex. Let me just show you, what the discontinuation looks like. So we also, of course, respond to any kind of feedback that we get that a journal might be predatory. And this is not taken lightly. And it is a very complex process, because it has to be, you have to find evidence that the journal is predatory. And as we as I mentioned in the beginning, if you look at, what are the characteristics of a really predatory journal, these are not things that are easy to detect. You have to do a lot of investigation to really prove that the journal is not doing peer review, for example, or that they are fraudulent in terms of who's on the editorial board. The other more superficial things, like how the website looks, and those are easy things to do, but to find real evidence is not easy. It often takes us a lot of time to really dig into it and find the evidence that a journal is predatory, and then it is discontinued and it's published on that list. Right, so these are, just for your interest, these are the criteria that we look at when we select journals. And you can see that if you follow these criteria, you will automatically avoid predatory journals. So the Scopus content and selection board, they look at whether the journal is peer reviewed. They find evidence of that peer review. It's important. They look at the abstracts, the regularity of the publication. So these journals are usually very organized and structured. They would also look at the publication's ethics statement, and that's why there's such a big focus on the statement, because they look at, they want to see that this is not a statement that was copy-pasted from another journal, for example, but it's the real statement of the institute of the journal about how they deal with ethical issues. And then various other factors are also taken into account. So you can see they look at the journal policy, the quality of the content, the journal standing. So who's the editor, who's the editorial board? Are there any gaps or any irregular publication trends? Because this is also one of the things where we sometimes can see that a journal might be predatory, is because there's a big, change in the profile of the journal. So you would find that there's a lot of journals, a lot of authors from one region publishing in a journal which is completely unrelated. So you can see there's no relation between who's publishing in that journal and the topics of the publication, the numbers, etc. There's an anomaly in terms of all of that. So we look into the regularity of publication, and then we look at the website in a lot of detail also. I'm saying we, I'm meaning this board, the content selection and advisory board, look into this in a lot of detail. Right. So getting to what can we do? So, we know at Scopus what we do. What can individual researchers do in terms of avoiding to publish in predatory journals, right? So the default position is don't respond to any email that you get, any email that you receive soliciting your research should be handled with suspicion, because this is not normal for journals. And then also look at the telltale signs. As I mentioned previously, those superficial things on the outside of the journal often give an indication of what's going on the inside of the journal. As I said, it's not enough evidence, but it's enough for us or for you to be suspicious of the journal. So that's the second one. So don't respond to any emails unless you do very thorough, examination of that journal. Then just keep in mind all of these signals that we are all aware of now. And then as a general rule, aim to publish in the top journals in your field. And what we mean by that is there are some organizations, one of them is Think, Check, and Submit. We also, within Elsevier, we have a guidance in terms of finding the right journal. And this is not starting with the journal and checking what is the, what are the characteristics of the journal, but we start with what is my topic, and trying to identify journals based on the most relevant journal that is, would be a good match for my article, for example. So you don't start with getting a name, looking at that. You start off with these guidance that is provided by Think, Check, and Submit, for example, and the type of checks, the type of steps that you go through in terms of identifying a journal in which to publish. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I would like to share with you where to find some of these. So these are hyperlinks, which you can use when you are, when you get the slides. So Think, Check, Submit, that provides specific steps. Elsevier, we provide specific steps that you go through when you are looking for a journal. So this one is, yes, this is a Think, Check, and Submit, and it starts off with asking you questions, guiding you through questions. Is this journal the right fit for me? Does the topic match the journal's scope? Does the journal publish the type of articles, like article reviews? Is there a reasonable chance of acceptance? So look at the acceptance rate of the journal. Is it read within the communities in which I want to reach, for example? So reputable journals provide this information on their website. So following these steps will essentially lead you to the right journal, or lead you away from predatory journals, at least. So many people ask us, many researchers ask us to give them a list of predatory journals, and this is impossible to do. There are many lists of predatory journals. There's Beale's list. The Beale's list is old now, but this is also being updated by some, freelance people that do that. There's Cabell's, which is a subscription list. There are multiple lists of predatory journals, and it's almost impossible to keep up with all of them, right? So I'm going to show you in the next slide. Also, there was an article also published in Nature. Yes, it was also published in Nature. And this study found that there were more than 90, of these avoid lists or predatory lists. And not one of them was a complete overlap. So you can see in this nice diagram that they provided, not one of them is completely authoritative in covering all the predatory journals, right? So I'm not saying that they are completely useless. It's not that. It's just that it's a very difficult task to be aware of all the journals and for one list to be comprehensive in covering all predatory journals. So what we recommend, that instead of trying to keep up with all the different predatory lists, is to rather to use the trusted lists, right? So we have lists like Scopus. As you saw, Scopus journals go through a process, a selection process, a quality process. Web of Science journals also go through that, so they can also be trusted. And the Directory of Open Access journals also check their journals before they list them to make sure that they are not predatory. So this is not to say that there are never any predatory journals that slip into these lists, because they do, unfortunately. Despite all the efforts that we do and other indexes like us do, they do slip in, but it is very lower, option for that to happen. And if that happens, we take very strong action, because this is our reputation on the line as a publishing company and as an indexing. We feel very strong about science and progressing science. So we fight this with everything that we have. So yes, you can look at the predatory lists, but it is almost more efficient to look at those lists that are regarded as the trusted lists. So my final slide is, in conclusion, it's important to understand the definition of predatory, because one of the things that we've noticed is that there's a conflation, I don't know what the word is exactly, of predatory and some other ethical issues within publishing that are all now regarded under the same same umbrella, but predatory is a very specific fraudulent activity. So it's important to understand exactly what is predatory and to distinguish that from other unethical practices that might be there. So read the signals, be aware of what the signals are that could give you an idea that it might be a predatory journal, and then basically select a journal that matches your topic best, and choose journals that are listed in reputable indexes. That is short and sweet, the guidance that we can offer. And then some of the resources that we have available, we will share with you through this presentation. Right. I'm going to stop here because I'm sure you have questions, and then we have time to go through the questions.